Arminianism is a Protestant theology movement that arose in argument with strict Calvinism. It takes its name from Jacobus Arminius, a Dutch Reformed theologian of the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Though the movement that followed him went beyond Arminius in some respects and developed through other means. The issue at the centre is salvation, or more exactly, the relation between God's grace and human response. Arminianism does not say human beings save themselves. It does not say grace is unnecessary. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It says no one comes to God without grace, but it also says grace does not work in a way that cancels meaningful human responses. It says that God's sovereignty and human responsibility are held together, and that is the central argument. Historically, Arminianism challenged the harsher forms of predestinarian thinking. Instead of saying that God's election is unconditional in the strict Calvinistic sense, Arminian theology classically speaks of conditional election, grace given for all, grace that can be resisted, and the real possibility in the many Arminian systems of falling from grace. And that's why the debate became so fierce, because this is not a small adjustment. It changed the feel of the whole salvation story. Now, one reason Arminianism has lasted is that it speaks to instincts that many Christians have very strongly, the sense that God genuinely calls all, and that human response is also real, and that divine love should not be described in a way that makes the non-elect seem passed over before the story even begins. And those instincts have deep force. And in later Protestant history, Arminianism becomes especially influential through Methodism and large parts of evangelical revival religion. But there are also costs and dangers. Arminian preaching can become anxious. It can slip into sounding as though the decisive weight of salvation rests too heavily on the human will. And at its worst, it can make grace sound like assistance rather than a full rescue. That is the point where critics push back hardest, because they fear that the glory of grace is being reduced and that the believer's security is being made too fragile. Still, one should be fair. Arminianism is not just sentimental free will religion. At its best, it is a serious attempt to defend both divine holiness and divine love, both grace and responsibility, both God's initiative and the reality of the human answer. That's why it keeps returning. The questions it handles are not going away. So Arminianism was and is a Protestant theological movement that arose in reaction to strict Calvinist predestination. It insists that God's grace is necessary for salvation, but that human response is also real, and that grace can be resisted, and that election is tied to faith rather than imposed without reference to it. It has powered major parts of evangelical history, especially revival religion, especially Wesleyan Methodism, and it remains one of the great fault lines in Protestant theology.